Welcome back to the Long View. I am here and delighted to be with Natasha Alford, the Grio, and much more. Natasha, thanks for joining.
Thanks so much for having me. Good to see you. Hi, everybody. Happy Friday.
So here we are on Halloween, but you wrote an article about a very different celebration in the Grio that I caught my eye. It was fascinating. And can you tell us about Jab Jab and how you ended up writing about this?
Absolutely. So, if you have ever been to the Caribbean, you know that there are carnival celebrations, and those celebrations are rooted in history. We know that in the Caribbean, the slave trade was a reality, and many of these islands trafficked Africans, and they brought them over to work in sugarcane fields, or to essentially again work for free and sustain the economies of these islands. And so what many of the enslaved Africans saw was that their colonial masters had these practices of carnival. And unfortunately, they were not allowed to participate in, formal celebrations, but they would find their own ways to celebrate when they were in private. And many times they actually would mock these colonial masters. So, with their big fancy dresses and sort of ballroom outfits that they brought over from France and from Britain, these enslaved Africans would make fun of them, and the message being that it was excess, right? And but also having their own celebrations of the communities that existed on their various islands. And so one of the celebrations that's really common is called Juve, and Juve translates, it's from the French word daybreak. And so this is when the party starts before the sun rises, and you watch it rise. And so in Grenada, connected to the abolition of slavery on the island of Grenada. According to Ian Charles, who's a cultural historian, many of the enslaved Africans took to the streets to celebrate that freedom, and they covered their bodies in black oil as part of that celebration. And so it's interesting because today is Halloween. And so if you ever saw an image of a person covered in black oil with, these horns that look like devil horns, the name of that person is a job, or a job, and that translates roughly to the word devil. And so it's really important to understand that when you see the job character, or you see this celebration of job where people are covered in black oil and they have the horns, that what they are doing is both mocking the colonial enslavers, right? But they're also really embracing their blackness, right? And they're saying that it's okay to be black, and also that everything that the enslaver called black people, devils, less than human, they're sort of embodying this character and making fun of that. And so you will see a celebration in a country like Grenada that is, tied to this Juve, this daybreak celebration, but it's really rooted in jab, and it's rooted in wearing all black and celebrating that. So I took part in that celebration, and I wrote an article about the revolutionary meaning of seeing these characters. And so again, it's great for Halloween because we're seeing all these characters that folks dress up as to sort of scare folks, but there are characters that really have significant meaning that some people might find scary, but I, got to participate and see a much deeper side of it.
How, I mean, often these traditions, as time goes on, people don't, are not aware of the original meaning or it changes. Today, in Grenada, for example, how cognizant are people are of what you just said, or is it just become how you dress up in a celebration? Are they thinking of it in the way you're describing it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think it actually applies to carnival overall, right? As carnival has become commercialized, and you have a lot of Americans who participate and they travel and they want to take the pictures and wear the fancy costumes, a lot of tourists don't necessarily know the history. They don't necessarily know the connection to the colonial era or anti-slavery slash abolition efforts. And so that's why it's important to have press and journalists like myself who are sent in with the mission to tell culturally relevant stories that are grounded in the history. Now, I would say that in Grenada, there's something about, the celebration of Blackness and the way that they do Juve and the way that they're dressed in all Black that I think a lot of people actually do know that there's a deeper meaning. It's such a striking image, but it also contradicts, right, a lot of the programming that we have just seen sort of in Western society that Black is bad, to be darker is somehow there's some shame or taboo to it. The sort of pressure to live up to Eurocentric ideals, which is lighter, not Black hair, straight hair, blonde hair, right? Like Jab contradicts all of that. And so I think a certain type of traveler who would go for that experience may be more inclined to actually understand or look it up or perceive that that is what is happening. But some of the cultural historians I interviewed on the island did say they have concerns about it being lost in the commercialization of the experience. And that also there's a bit of like hypersexualization that can happen too, right? Because you're talking about freeing up yourself, you're drinking, you're dancing in the streets. And so some people come for that revelry and they're not as interested in understanding the deeper roots of it. So that is something that people are concerned about, and they are again, inviting voices like myself as an American journalist, a Black American journalist with roots in the Caribbean and other places around the world to participate and have a deeper understanding.
And can you talk a little bit about the music? What kind of
Yeah.
music is played and who plays the music?
So when you listen to jazz music, it's a very distinct sound. If you ever heard soca music, I don't know how many of the viewers have listened to soca, especially if you're in New York City. You've certainly heard it over the summer at parades.
Mm.
But Job has a very distinct sound. And I'm gonna I have a few different notes here about what it's called. So first of all, the conch shell. If you've seen a shell, when you blow through it, you know that it makes noise. In the jab tradition, they blow the conch shell to signal that it's time to participate in the festivities. So you'll have a conch shell. You'll also have a series of drums that are used just for this celebration. And so, as journalists, we were taken to this little town in the mountains. It was like a 2-hour drive from the Sandals Resort and all the, touristy areas. And there was a camp where that is exactly what they do. They practice the jab tradition. So there was the conch shell, they covered themselves in black oil, and they had the, three sets of specific drums. And there's someone called a capital who is like the leader of the group. And the capital, he does spells. And so he speaks out a message. It could be political, it could be comical, it could be something that's happening in that community, or about something that's happening in the community. And the group responds. So there's like a call and response moment with the shell and the drums, and they parade throughout the town. And it's just an incredible experience. I don't know how to describe it. You feel the power of the drums. You feel the power of not music played from a speaker, but people who are singing and who like have this tradition has been passed on from generation to generation. And so jab music is really intense. I went to a jab music competition in Grenada and the stadium was shaking with, the latest hits that people have been singing. And so again, if you're really curious, you can go to YouTube, look up Grenada Spice Mass. And so that's MAS, which is short for masquerade. And you'll hear exactly what I'm talking about. But there's just like a lot of raw power in the music, whether it's played in the streets or, whether it's played at a party.
Is religious uh, symbolism and song integral to this? Is it seen as a more secular
Yeah.
celebration? How do those intersect?
So I interviewed a pastor who was very anti-jab, and that
Uh,
goes to your earlier question. Not everybody in Grenada plays jab, even though it's very much tied up in Grenadian like identity. If for the more conservative, especially the Christian or Catholic practitioners on the island, it's seen as playing the devil. So they do believe that even though there are some folks who find this to be revolutionary and to be satirical. They see it as just going a bit too far, that it could, summon those sorts of spirits or kind of play in the devil's face, so to speak. And so this pastor I interviewed in Paraclete, he said that he was 16. He snuck out of his house many years ago. This had to be in like the 50s or the 60s. And his mother caught him as he was climbing back through the window, and he was, covered in black. And she was like, if you play the devil, you pay the devil. And he never participated in the tradition
Mhm.
since. So there's definitely, a divide in terms of like the really religious community that don't participate. I've done carnival in other countries, Trinidad and Tobago, Jamaica, and I found similarly that even if they weren't playing jab, not everybody participates in the carnival experience. It could be seen as a bit raucous, maybe yeah, just if you're a religious conservative, you may not be inclined to participate. So, but when I interviewed these cultural historians, for some of them, they want to challenge Christianity, right? They saw Christianity as an imposition from slavery. They saw Christianity as forcing a religion which centered a white God, right? White representations of Jesus Christ, these sort of saints who were only represented as white. And so for them, to rebel against Christianity is also, or to rebel against religion and the constraints of, what they see as constraints of religion is part of why they do it.
And the other thing you mentioned in the article is it's cross class and different
Yeah.
occupational. So are the boundaries that fluid in terms of who participates, or did you see, other than the religious story you just told, any kind of people who will not participate?
Yeah, I saw politicians. There were, teachers, professionals. Some of the hotel managers were like, as soon as we get off our shift, we're going to the party.
Uh-huh.
So it crossed those lines, and I did appreciate that. I do think, as I said, like the commercialization of some of these cultural experiences can lead to only those who have the most money being able to participate. And I've seen that on other islands where it's very like social influencer heavy or celebrity heavy. But here it really felt democratic in a way, and there was no like, VIP jab experience. Everyone is dirty and covered in black oil and marching down the street. And yeah, even I did see a couple celebrities actually, like, some reality stars who were in the mix, and people just saw them and waved and they kind of kept going. So it's kind of like that New Yorker experience. Like if you love being in New York because nobody really cares who you are, that
Yeah.
you get that in the streets there. So yeah, it was pretty powerful.
And you, at one point in the article, talk about thinking of Malcolm X.
Yeah.
How so, and what was the connection?
Well, Malcolm X, when he is often spoken about, we don't always talk about his Grenadian roots, right? He's seen as a, freedom fighter, but more of a militant version of that. If you look at kind of mainstream representations of Black leaders during civil rights. And the fact that his mother was born in Grenada, she was a Pan Africanist, her conception of Blackness and embracing Blackness, she brought that with her when she went to Canada and then when she went to the United States. Right. Someone put in the comments, Red, Detroit Red. That was Malcolm X's, street name before he became Malcolm X. And so I think at a time when there is a lot of division, and we actually saw this during the election, that there were some sort of divides in the Black diaspora like emerging, with people, basically saying that this whole idea of being one Black community, they were challenging that, right? And there were some forces, I think, who were looking to exploit that and try to kind of break up the Black vote, quote unquote, or encourage people not to vote during the election. Um, but at a time when those divisions sometimes play out in online spaces, I thought it was powerful to see Malcolm X as both an African American and part of the Caribbean diaspora, to know that these were his roots. and that the community in Grenada really had so many examples of um, revolting against slavery. There's some really like important slave revolts that happened in the country, but also a spirit of entrepreneurship and leadership, and eventually independence from their colonial masters. And so when you just learn about that history, it makes a lot of sense as you think about people who eventually were born on this soil, and the sort of like philosophies and ideologies that would inform their sense of what Black freedom looks like.
By the way, what kinds of food are people eating at the
Oh yeah,
celebration?
well, Grenada's the spice island, so all the food is good,
Yeah.
but you will find nutmeg, cinnamon, like all of those spices are very prevalent on the island. I saw some influences as well, like roti. Some of the influences from the Indian Caribbean that we also see in places like Trinidad were there. Lots of fresh fish, curry, just anything that you could imagine being tied to spice, it was all throughout the food. It was delicious.
But those are more integral to Grenada than the particularities of the celebration and the
Right.
carnival, right?
Exactly. The celebration itself is
Yeah.
really focused on putting on the Black oil and darkening yourself and really embracing your Blackness. And so if you're watching this, like, I wish I could show you some of my pictures. I'm on my phone, so I can't show you. But if you
Yeah.
look up Jab Jab, which is JAB, you will see these images of people,
Right.
their bodies covered in oil. Oh, yeah, there it is right there.
That's from the article. Yeah.
Exactly, and look at, like, the horns, you will see that sometimes they carry, like, it looks like a dead fish or a dead animal. Sometimes they're dragging chains through the street, and the chains symbolize breaking free from slavery.
Yeah.
There's there Yeah, 6 cents can't make the payroll. So 6 cents meaning it's too little bit of money to actually make payroll, right? So you'll see political statements that are happening even as people masquerade and they dress up as devils.
Here's one more from the article. Fortunately, I printed it out.
Yeah, I took
Um,
that picture. That was in the town of Paraclete, where we were marching through the street and they were using the conch shell and they had the drums. And we ate the national dish, which is called oil down, and it's in a big pot. And they put all the vegetables, all the seasoned meat together, and they make that pot right there. And then as a group, we eat it together. And, it's a real communal type experience.
And then I had one final question before I do. Thank you, subscribers, for joining us and everyone watching live and later. And I hope you'll consider becoming a paid subscriber to support the long view and these kinds of conversations, guests, and more. Finally, a little bit into you as a writer. This is a very personal and ethnographic account. It's really interesting, I think, the way it's written. How just take us a little bit into how you do that and how you thought about capturing this story while you were there.
Yeah, it's really similar to how I wrote my memoir. So I published a memoir last year called American Negra. And I really believe in the power of history and weaving personal narrative with it. Some people won't crack open a history book and read about slavery in the Caribbean, but they will read an article about the jab. And being able to weave that tale it's a skill that I've developed, and I hope to continue to develop and tell stories that way, because people remember the characters. They remember, how an experience changes you. And I remember being a little girl. I'm born in 1986, so I'm a millennial, and we were just part of a generation where we caught the internet, right? Like we saw all of the changes in society, and so these types of stories, like having access to them, now people may take that for granted, but when I was growing up, I wish I had stories like this so I could understand, and could see examples of people really embracing their blackness in some of the most like revolutionary and unapologetic ways, but also understanding that abolition and the freedom struggle was something that happened in many places. And America, the continental US, we actually had this like a smaller number of enslaved Africans who were trafficked here compared to the Caribbean and Latin America. The majority actually went to Brazil. And so there's this story that really we're all connected to, that many of us are weaving together now that we have the power of the internet and, the opportunity to talk to each other. Um, that again, just, was harder to do back then, but I think we should all take advantage of it now.
Natasha Alford, writing for the Grio. Thank you so much for sharing this remarkable story and piece. Everyone should go read it. It's online. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you so much, Julian. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.